Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Ignatian Family Teach-In, a breakout session in our DEI plus A track. Those initials stand for diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. My name is Jamal Adams of Loyola High School, and I'm here with my colleague, Ms. Amanda Montez, and we're really excited about talking about our journey in a couple of different times in the last 6 months, particularly in this online environment in which we have used norm setting to create space for culturally relevant conversations. As we go through our presentation today, I hope that you can glean some things that may be helpful as you think about bringing together students and faculty and community members around challenging conversations. At the end, we'll make sure that we have a slide that shares some of the resources that we will be talking about today in this meeting. So I'm going to stop sharing and bring you back to the two of us. Again, it is my great pleasure and an opportunity to introduce Amanda. It has been quite a journey as we've had a good chance to work on a couple of projects together, but I want to give her a moment right now to explain or talk a little bit about herself, where she works and what she does. So Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jamal. So I'm Amanda Montez. I work at Sacred Heart Nativity Schools in San Jose, which is a Jesuit middle school. I teach Spanish, do a culture and identity class, parent ed, and I'm getting my graduate degree at University of San Francisco in international and multicultural education, with all my thesis work being about critical race theory and how do we implement it into our classroom. So huge opportunity. So just really glad to be able to work with Jamal and be able to share space and really talk about something that's super important to all of us.
That's outstanding. Thank you. And I'll take a few moments here. My name is Jamal Adams. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion and the Director of Faculty at Loyola High School of Los Angeles. I've been in my role as the Director of Equity and Inclusion for a little over 5 years. I am a graduate of Loyola High School. After graduating from Loyola High School, I was fortunate enough to be recruited and went and played basketball at Columbia, where I also got my degree in economics. I spent almost 12 years working in finance before I grew up and decided I wanted a real job. It came back to the Jesuit world, where now I'm entering my 16th year teaching. Beyond those two directorships, I also teach economics and African American studies. And if that's not enough, I'm also the head varsity basketball coach. So I stay busy, but to be honest with you, it is really this space, this Director of Equity and Inclusion, that has really lit my fire over the last 4 or 5 years. It's entering into a space and hoping that by conversation, by moving hearts and minds of both faculty and our students, that we continue to impact the world in a positive way, that we can see and be the change we want to be. And I think a lot of that starts with our conversation. So I'm going to give a little overview. Again, I talked about this summer. Amanda and I have both, by the great invitation within our province. Amanda's up in San Jose, I'm in Los Angeles, but by the great invitation by our province, we worked on 2 great projects this summer. The first I would call was Ignite. It was a fellowship that we created for about 40 students at 7 or 8 Jesuit West high schools to come together for a week. And I think succinctly I would call it was a community organizing boot camp. But because we brought kids from so many different places, we really felt each day, not just the first day, but each day it was important for us to set norms in terms of how we were going to communicate with each other, how we were going to behave, and how we were going to understand and interpret the information that was presented to us. After that, if that wasn't enough, Amanda and I were really blessed to be tapped to be co-editors of a huge project within the province, and that was our core project, which is the acronym that stands for Collaborative Organizing for Racial Equity. And by the direction of Mrs. Annie Fox, we were asked to call together resources, to write introductions, to actually welcome people into the toolkit and the website. And we thought no better way to do that than to continue to set norms as a way of understanding and navigating the space and the website and the toolkit. And so when this invitation is opened by Chris Kerr and Aaron Brown to be present within the Ignatian Family Teach-In, we thought it would be a great way to kind of summarize all this great work and time together. So to move forward, and to offer some insight into what we do, I'm going to start by asking Amanda a question, and we're going to try and make this conversation. So I apologize if it's a little bit disjointed, but we've got an outline and some notes and some different things that we want to show and display. And like you probably are aware, Zoom doesn't always make for the easiest of transitions, though we're going to have some fun with it. So really, I'm going to start by this and offer this question to Amanda to get us started. And that would be, what are culturally relevant conversations, and why why do they exist, and why do they live up to our Ignatian character?
Yeah, I'm a product of Jesuit education, just like Jamal. I went to Xavier College Prep in Palm Desert, LMU, taught at Xavier. So I'm no stranger to Jesuit ed. And what is at the heart of our charism, right, is that we're living out social justice, and there's no other way to do that than to be looking at the world around us, especially in 2020. I don't know that you can really get away with being like, I don't know what social justice is. I think you'd really have to have some pretty big blinders on for that one. So how do we just talk about current issues going on in our society, right? And the goal is always to build community within that. Again, a huge pillar of Jesuit ed, of like bridging the gaps, getting to know other people. And I think about, like, I used to lead immersion trips, and we could have easily set these norms there, right? You can set these norms in your classroom. You can set these norms on Zoom, right? That they are important in every single space, whether it's professional development or within your classroom. And it's just always to offer bridges to lived experience. So I think my goal as an educator is always to create a community of curiosity. Where can my students ask genuine questions if they don't understand what's going on in the world? We never expect our students to be 100% knowledgeable, right? That's why they're coming to us. That's why they're sitting in our seats in our classrooms. So how can we create a community where they feel comfortable asking, like, well, what does this word mean? And what communities, how do these differentiate? And I don't understand, instead of a cancel culture. And I think that is a huge, being able to set norms within talking about what can be divisive conversations is really important in today's society.
I think that's a wonderful, wonderful overview. And if I could add into that, I think that that cancel culture that particularly our young people, maybe not our colleagues, but our young people are acutely aware of as they look at their various social media feeds, I think that creates fear, right? Particularly to admit one is ignorant or doesn't know,
Right.
is not aware, hasn't had an experience. So I think norms are also, if I could be so bold, I would call them an invitation. I think it's an invitation. It's a setting of the playing field. It's an evening of the playing field, so that one has the courage to say, I don't know, and can you please teach me, or can I understand what your experiences are like as a backdrop to something that maybe I have never experienced myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to move our society in a way into a more just society, into a space where we're not yelling at each other and screaming at each other, and refusal to understand another one's perspective. I think norms offer a great invitation for everybody, an equaling, so that everybody, those that are very aware, those versus those that aren't very aware, can enter a space together, and that exchange can go and be good. One of my favorite things that I learned from a mentor of mine, Henry Ward at LMU, who does norm setting when he does some of his culturally consciousness training, was that he hoped that anytime you enter into these spaces, that the goal would be that what is said here stays here, what is learned goes out in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a powerful reason why we do some norm setting. So you alluded to it a little bit earlier, Amanda, but I think it would be great, again, to talk to folks maybe more specifically about where would you and where, what spaces do you think norm setting has real value for those that are watching us today?
I used to work in DEI in Baltimore, gosh, back during the last election, doing restorative justice circles. And so we would always, if we were talking about racism, sexism, police brutality, transphobia, food deserts, you got to set the stage. And I think about that for setting the stage in a workshop is just the same as setting a stage for your classroom. And so these norms can be used community workshops, professional developments for teachers. I've been leading professional developments for our nativity staff, and something that we always go through. I also have been using these for my 8th graders. We do a culture and identity class, and they've been really awesome about like, no, these are the rules we want to live by. Like, this is how we want to show up to class. And they tend to think a little bit more outside the box. And so I really appreciate, I think, the collaborativeness that norms can bring. And I hope that you use them for every space, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. You know, when I was thinking about our questions and our large questions that we wanted to answer, you know, in a very amorphous way, I think anytime there's a community gathering, right, and we're going to talk about issues that are really critical to any of our communities, whatever apostolates that may take this information in, that setting norms, again, invites everybody to be heard, gives folks a understanding of where they want to be, of how they should be, how they should interact. Some of the things that make it easy to create conversation, but I also think norms hopefully help give our gatherings a roadmap of what to do when we get into sticky situations, when you may have heard something that you disagree with or that's painful or triggering. I think going back to your norms allows for you to hopefully offer a salve to that wound, to acknowledge that wound, and then allow the conversation to keep going. So you know, that's kind of I think the why. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about, you know, why you think. I mean, you kind of already set the stage around why, but I definitely want to make sure I'll give you the stage again if you like to answer that.
Yeah, I think what I've really seen through a lot of my reading at USF is like, how do we move our spaces of like creating critical thinkers from being a safe space to a brave space, right? So safe space is like, you say something, you keep it to yourself, and it was like really hurtful, and nothing is ever done with it. And I think that when we're creating these brave spaces in these culturally relevant conversations, it's that we're holding each other accountable to grow, right? And like, in order to grow, you've got to make mistakes, and you're probably going to fumble over your words, or you're not going to know what to say. But I think that it holds everyone to being accountable to in the space, because the goal is to create a better society. The goal is to move the pendulum forward. And so, yeah, I hope we use them in every space.
Amen. So I think you know, one of the challenges that I think is awesome that the Ignatian Family Teach-In and the Ignatian Solidarity Network asked for all of us that were putting these together was to move beyond theory and into practice. And so really at this point, Amanda and I want to take a moment just to kind of walk you through the way that we operationalize norm setting. I'm going to talk about a healing space that we created at Loyola High School this past spring after the murder of George Floyd. It was an open forum in which we invited students and faculty to enter together just to talk a little bit about what's going on. And I'm really proud of my community. We had well over 500 people join us over the course of 4 days in these 1 hour spaces. And a lot of the feedback was just that this was cathartic. It was great to hear how other people felt. And to be able to internalize different perspectives beyond what they were seeing on TV. I think after that, Amanda's going to speak a little bit about the space that we created at night, and maybe hopefully you'll see some similarities, because definitely we worked on these together, so you'll see some definitely similarities. And maybe after we go through those two parts of our presentation, we'll talk a little bit about some of our takeaways. And then again, we'll leave you with some information on how to follow up on some of the. Then we'll talk about our third piece, which is core, which is where we got an opportunity to co-edit, and we'll go from there. So I think actually, in terms of order, because I'd love for you to talk about core, I'm going to invite you, Amanda, to go first, talk a little bit about Ignite, if that makes sense, perfect. And then I'll talk a little bit about Loyola. Let me make sure, I just thought about that. Let me make sure that you could share your screen.
Perfect.
All right, you should be able to do that now, and I'm going to be quiet.
No. So here is what we were thinking about when we were planning Ignite. We were bringing students from Seattle Prep, oh gosh, Jesuit High in Sacramento, Cristo Rey Sacramento, Cristo Rey San Jose, Brophy, Loyola, and then Xavier also in Phoenix. I think I named everyone. And what we wanted to do is these kids didn't know each other. And so how do we bring them together to create an authentic, loving community over Zoom, I think was really important for us. And so we as educators like brought together kind of all of the norms that we knew and created Google Doc workspaces, which have been really incredible. And I think most educators are already using them. This is already a tool that you've got in your toolkit. So some of the norms that we have, and we'll definitely link these, they're in our core website. I think like when we're talking with high school students, we were able to suggest these norms, and then each school would name 2, 3, 4 norms that they found were particularly important. So the young women from Cristo Rey San Jose talked about recognizing your own privileges and defer to lived experiences as things that were not on our list, right? And I think that that was the perfect way of like letting student voices be heard. And because again, we can't think of everything as educators. We never will be able to do that. And so we always came back to this every single day of what were the norms that each school said, these are the most important to us. And so how do we all walk together in a more just, equitable way through those norms? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. It really was great. I wanted to make sure I didn't pop up while you were talking. It really was great to see the kids every day add new things, right?
Yeah.
And continue. When we talk about any norms that you need today, some of the speakers that maybe the day before that had ignited a part of their brain, or an exercise that we did around power, power mapping, things of that sort, they will come back and the next day in our norms list will continue to grow. And really what I'm most proud of is that the students continue to generate more ideas going forward.
Yeah.
And that was really, really powerful.
I think too, like on this Zoom, in the Zoom space, like we really made use of the chat, which I mean, I think in spaces with young people especially has been really powerful for them to like get their voices heard in other ways. And so I think about like the quiet kids being able to type like a private message if they needed to, and just being able to communicate in a different way. And loved during Ignite, just the kids every morning would put on like, this is the norm that I'm really going to work on today, you know, and it might be like, I'm going to affirm, you know, and we'd be like, there would just be so much love in the chat, and like, or I'm going to live to deferred experiences. You know, a lot of our students that were at that conference came from predominantly white institutions. We had a few co-ed schools, no, 2 co-ed schools. And so it was really a white male dominated space. And so how did people were really good about stepping up and stepping back, right? And so that was because they saw these norms. They're like, okay, I know I'm a little quiet today, and I gotta step up. Like I need to hear my voice because this is a lived experience that another student has only read about. And I think I appreciated them being able to kind of have some rules and some foundation to like navigate challenging conversations that way.
It was amazing. I really felt like the norms were a platform or a basis or foundation, excuse me, that we were able to keep growing on and growing on. Yeah. And as the days went on, they continue to illuminate what was going on. So thank you for that overview. I'm going to jump in a little bit and talk about a space that we created at Loyola. As I said, this past spring, in the wake of the social unrest that was created with the murder of George Floyd, and particularly as we saw protests in Los Angeles begin to take off and start. Let me make sure. I apologize. As you can hear, we entered this space with a song, and so I'm going to actually jump forward with that because that song will keep playing. But we really wanted to set the stage for you all. Again, we invited faculty and students. We had a great mix every day, and our goal was to create breakout rooms of 4 people to have discussion, and it was randomized. So young folks and their adult counterparts could be in the same space at the same time. And so one of the things that we thought was critical to that notion right now was this idea of our norm setting. So again, we used a Rupe quote to get the space set, but really I think it was this space and the norm setting that was important to us. As Amanda showed you before, I'm not going to spend a ton of time we really started off with these 5 kind of macro level norm setting, and that was one that acknowledged that the lens that we see every through is built from lessons taught and learned, the people we encountered, the lived experience that we have as we walk into the room. We wanted to also acknowledge that we come with biases, that all of us are an aggregate of the things that we've seen and done and what we've heard. And sometimes those biases get in the way of us understanding other people's experiences. But we come to this space understanding that and knowing that we wouldn't have enough time to discuss everything. I think setting the idea that we are entering a space of goodwill as an invitation to this space helps us hopefully move forward in a way that, again, when we hit those rough patches, we can find our way forward. We wanted the climate to be honest and open. And lastly, we wanted to acknowledge that we would make space. After that, and I did the MCs of each of those opening things, we wanted to give them some more ideas, some more space to talk about, to stay engaged. I think Amanda and I are going to, on the back end, talk about our favorite singular norm as a way just to give you something to work with. But we wanted to give folks an idea, again, on other things that they should keep in mind within their space. And it's always the case when we kind of get to the end of setting the top-down norm setting, we ask that question to the group: are there any other things that they may need? And this is, again, where we heard stuff. We both heard stuff at Loyola, but we definitely heard kids bring other concerns or ideas to mind and Ignite that help grow our norm setting and continue to make it more and more robust every day. From there, we got into the breakout rooms. We talked about it, and then, as you can see, I'm kind of clicking through quickly. We had some different questions that set the space. So it is a process that we are proud of, a process that we will continue to do. We have a student group at Loyola right now out of my office that is going to host their first listening or talking session, student-run talking session this Friday. And they're really well acquainted with the idea that norms are going to drive the way we get started. So I think the last thing that we wanted to share, Amanda, would probably be around the narrative of core. And I think I'm gonna step back and particularly one Diva, one Mike, which is love. I definitely want to again talk about the honor I had in working with you on this. Like, it was really great. Our opportunity to kind of be one-on-one and talk about this. And then go through that and maybe what I'll do is I'll share the screen and pull up the website, and maybe you could talk a little bit about particularly that space, the Reflections to Start space, and I'll click as you tell me, and then I'll start to wrap it up.
Perfect.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, I would say too, I know we hadn't talked about this, but I think for any educator, put these in your syllabus. Like, I think that students will get so used to them that they will get used to coming into the space. And I think that they're going to lend for a lot of better conversations. And this is something that we hope that you can turn to. This was built, I think, with a lot of Jesuit West in mind, that because of our conversations, we had been intentionally listening to our communities for the past 6 months in a community. We did a community organizing boot camp, I could say, as adults, right? To kind of listen to what our communities needed, and really loved the outcome of that. We listened for 6 months, worked together in collaboration, and we heard a lot of environmental justice and gender and voting. And what we really heard underneath it was, well, we have to address race, because if we don't address this elephant in the room, then we're going to have more elephants in the room that no one addresses. So that's really where Jamal and I kind of came into play and worked with a lot of people across Jesuit institutions to crowdsource for CORE. So CORE is a website available to anyone. And what we ask that when you're looking at it, that you go first to the reflection to start. So you can go to the toolkit and look at what types of resources you would like to share, maybe within your classroom or professional development, or you want to bring it to your church group. But we have to reflect about where we authentically are, number one. And we can't do that just here, look at these resources and figure it out, right? So for Jamal and I, this was huge, that you're able to understand our vocabulary, are very intentional, like being anti-racist versus non-racist. Like, why are we using the term BIPOC? So it was really important for us to have these terms so you can see this. But again, reflecting on where you are, where your institution is, if you're working for an institution, right? So like, where does a nativity school stand in terms of racial justice? Are you doing professional developments? What is your admin team look like? We just ask a lot of questions that get you thinking. And the big part, though, why we're here today is really to talk about norm setting. So you can get all of our norms that we talk about here. We hope that you don't recreate the wheel. We crowdsource these. We work together. We expand on these, and and our students add to them every time. So this is an ever-growing list. It's never complete, and there's all sorts of like great gems. One Devo, one Mike, step up, step back, assume best intentions, defer to live experiences. And I think it's just really to elevate who is in the room and whose voices get to be heard. And that is really big for when Jamal and I were meeting this summer. We were working again with these high school students. And again, the space was really dominated by a lot of white male students. We were talking a lot about racism, and it was named. Like one of the norms was name group dynamics in the moment. And one of our student moderators, Sophia, just really crushed it and said, hey, whose voices have we heard? We don't have to come out and say, we're only hearing these voices and this is problematic, right? But asking the questions of like, whose voices have we heard? Who needs to be heard? And now what norms are you going to do going into this afternoon session? And I think that was probably one of the most powerful. I mean, I've been setting norms for years, right? And I think watching students navigate this on Zoom and watching a lot of young men go, holy cow, we are the dominant narrative and we are upholding the dominant narrative and we need to pass the mic, was just a really great reminder too of like, step up, step back. If you're that quiet kid that I know I was, might be hard to believe, but when I was in high school and middle school, like I didn't want to share. I was good. I was going to listen. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And I think that goal was always like, I loved that one because it was this reminder, like, get out of your shell, do it, say something. Like you can't, these are brave spaces, they're not safe spaces. Like say something because your voice in this matters. And it's really important that you're sharing what's on your mind and your heart. And then, likewise, if somebody's sharing constantly, take a step back, hear from other folks. And I think that it just really can create a really great sense of equity if they're used correctly. And I think that they hold accountability. I've seen with my 8th grade boys recently, we're doing culture and identity, and they say, one of our goals is you have to have an opinion. So I'm like, well, if you're going to have an opinion, right, then you better read the news, right? Like you better be ingesting media. If we're talking about the elections, you can't just rely on TikTok. You can't just rely on social media. How do we have this blend so we can talk about it, And it's been really great because it holds them accountable and they came up with it. So I think that there's a sense of ownership to that space that we have together. And it's been really powerful.
I love that. You have to have an opinion, and it's peers. Yeah. That's being driven by the peers. Again, yeah. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it continues to be an invitation to enter the space. And I'll say my favorite one, and one that I think it's not practiced a lot, but again, I think it allows for spaces and in some of our cultural consciousness training with adult community at Loyola, this has been used a couple times. And that's the idea of oops and ouch. I know it seems a bit sophomoric or preschoolish, but just to acknowledge that maybe something that was said or shared when someone broke a norm and used a collective you, people versus like I believe, things like that. That a way to gently call them out, right, and to acknowledge that there's been injury and then there's been hurt is a simple ouch. And God willing, right? Again, because we want to believe that everyone's entering into the space with goodwill. That those that may have injured, right, who created the injury, that they would have the wherewithal to say, "Oops," right, and to acknowledge that they made a mistake, and that acknowledgement, right, of humanity is really growth, right? I don't know how we solve the social ills of America unless we come to some kind of reckoning of the reality of the historical record. And I think these times only get more confusing. The news cycle, the polarization, and the dynamic between our different political ideologies, leads for a lot of confusion. And I think if we can again acknowledge that we don't know everything, that we're here to learn and make mistakes, oops and ouch, without some type of yelling match or devolving the space, really helps us move forward at that point. So those are a lot of our thoughts, and some of the spaces that we shared this summer. I guess I'll end our time together, and before we do our breakout during the week of Ignatian Family Teach-In, and I'm just going to ask Amanda, as you think about culturally relevant conversations, or what you're doing with your young folks in your culture and identity class, what are your hopes and dreams for young folks that enter these spaces, and maybe again, even talk a little bit about your passion for why you do this work.
Yeah. Oh gosh. What a big question. I hope that kids come into spaces. I was just with kids right before we hopped onto this to film. And I think that how can we empower kids to feel that their voice matters, even at a young age? And so I'm with middle schoolers, and I think I was getting them rallied up about voting. And I think how do we get kids excited about conversations that are really, it is exhausting, right? It is exhausting to talk about racism and the pandemic and climate change and sexism and immigration reform. It is exhausting to hold all of these things. And so I think my hope is that I think that there is a really big movement within our young people always, but it feels like really now that there's a huge movement of wanting change, needing change. And I think giving them the space to process what they're going through and what they're reading, that's why we have to do this, right? They can't just all of a sudden go out and write policy, right? Or run for office, or I don't know, teach, we have to give them space to process. And so I really hope that with these conversations that we give our young folks spaces where they feel comfortable, where they feel heard, where they feel like they can be their true authentic selves. And I think for us as facilitators, we've really got to check the hierarchy in the room. That's they're all good norms, right? That's such a good one. I think when we're able to be humble enough to go, I don't know all the answers, that creates such more of a culture of curiosity. And so definitely cultivating that, I think spark more interest and animate them for more change. I think we haven't been able to do it yet. And in 2020, we need all the people we can.
Amen. I love that answer. And if I can expand, close up, I just think that, when I entered into this space, it's a DEI work. I mean, I had an idea, that I really wanted to illuminate, societal ills. And I always say this, I think our work is about helping people learn how to live well together. It's not just live together, but live well together. And that is that vibrant exchange of culture and ideas and lived experience. But I also would say that probably what I really want to emphasize in this space is that this is mission work, right? I think Arupe wrote that, if we are going to build men and women with and for others, that looks like people of consciousness, of compassion, and of competency, they actually are learning. And I think that this is pedagogically sound, that norm setting is a way of, again, inviting all names, all people to the table, right? And allowing for that free exchange of ideas and thoughts and policies. And if the world's going to get better, it's going to be because people of goodwill have come together and have demanded it to be so. And so I hope we continue to build young folks that are willing to be courageous and go out and change the world. That's really what I hope to do. So.
And I just hope that we empower some teachers to these aren't easy conversations, but if there's any sort of, teachers should be equipped to have challenging conversations, especially within our Jesuit institutions. And that's why hopefully that's why we get into Jesuit education, because we really believe that it is important and we're living to the mission of social justice. And so don't shy away from these conversations. Lean back onto these norms. We're trying to give you this little toolkit that you didn't know you needed. And don't shy away from these conversations. Like, our students need them, our world needs them, and lean into it as much as you can.
Couldn't be said better. And I just want to say, first off, thank you, Amanda, as my colleague
Thank you,
and
Jamal.
friend. Thank you for saying yes to this invitation. You made it immensely better doing this together, both for Ignite and Core, and now for Ignatian Family Teach-In. And I'm going to close by saying that at the end of this, we should have in our video, again, some of the links to some of the things that we showed today, and as well as our email addresses again, so that if you have any need to reach out to us directly for help, please do not hesitate. We hope you have a great week within the Ignatian Family Teach-In, and look forward to hopefully hosting an open Q&A forum where we can see all of your faces and have more free exchange of ideas. God bless and be well.